Welcome back to our channel. We want to thank you for watching. As Africa continues to go through a huge geopolitical shift that is not sitting well with Africa's partners, African continent have its own priorities that is trying to put on the table. And what's happening? Its partners do not want to accept that the continent has arrived to a stage where it needs to start making decisions for its own citizens. The African countries need to select its own partners and make strategic decisions if the African people have to survive in this complex geopolitical environment that we all are seeing today, with the 5 permanent members feeling about their own interests. The continent, as you know, with over 28% of the UN voting rights, needs to make some strategic choices. However, countries like the United States of America will let you believe that African countries do not align to its strategy. You remember this famous term, you are either with us or you are with the enemy. But the African countries have decided to go away from that particular trajectory that was placed for them, and this doesn't sit well in the US policy circle. In this episode, we shall be diving into a former United States of America's ambassador who will share with us the complexity that's involved on how they need to navigate the policy design for them to implement in those regions. But first, let's look at what the United States will let you believe that the relationship with Africa is on a particular trajectory.
Just over a year ago, the Biden administration launched its U.S. strategy for Africa. It was meant to redefine and rebuild relations with African countries. Well, today we'll look at what has been accomplished, as well as the state of relations between the United States and a part of the world U.S. President Joe Biden said he recognized as a key geopolitical player. But this new reimagined relationship between the U.S. and African nations hasn't always been smooth sailing. On Capitol Hill here in Washington, ties between the U.S. and South Africa is under scrutiny, including Pretoria's foreign policy positions.
That's the double standards that African countries are facing in the modern days with regards to their foreign policy. South Africa is one of the major and very powerful economies in the global south and also in the continent of Africa. If a country like South Africa cannot make its own decision, what about countries like Djibouti and other very small countries like Sierra Leone? So these nations have to speak out to an extent to make very important strategic decisions to enhance the life and also infrastructural development and growth in their communities. If a country like South Africa that has gone away to explain regards to its foreign minister Naledi Pandor and the president of the country Cyril Ramaphosa that South Africa will not back down and South Africa will make strategic decisions to select its own partners. But if the country of South Africa goes ahead to make such decision, this is what the country will get from US lawmakers who actually put the American interest ahead of those of the African people.
South Africa has a choice in what partners to prioritize, but so too does the United States. I believe it entirely appropriate to scrutinize the conduct of our important partner when the risks compromising our strong, dynamic, bilateral relationship are at hand. I think it's my belief that South Africa is currently at an inflection point, and I view the next several months as critical in demonstrating whether it will put our important partnership back on track.
Talking about selecting your own particular interest, that's the reason why I like geopolitics, because it gives you a perspective as for you to make those strategic decisions. The fact that the United States is fighting for its own interest, there's nothing wrong with other African nations making their own choices to select partners that will meet their needs. This is very important, and African nations should start understanding that the way the world works is not the way they think, and they have to start moving really closer to those decisions that affect their own people. If you look at what is happening in the Sahel, in Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, and also in Niger, that has asked the United States troops to leave the country. However, other experts in the United States of America, like former Ambassador Charles Ray. Ambassador Charles Ray is an expert who brings to us rich experience in regards to this geopolitical perspective of the United States and also the continent of Africa. Ambassador Charles A. Ray is a member of the Board of Trustees and also chair of the African program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He served as the U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia and the Republic of Zimbabwe. In addition, he was the United States of America Consul General to the Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, operating the Consulate General there in 1998. From 2006 to 2009, he served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense to the POW Missing Personnel Affairs, responsible for DoD effort to account for the missing in combat from World War II. During his diplomatic career, Mr. Ray served as the Deputy Chief of Mission in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and at consular posts in Guangzhou and also Shenzhen, China, and more importantly also in Chiang Mai, Thailand. He was diplomat in residence at the University of Houston during 2005-2006 academic year, responsible for outreach and recruiting at colleges and universities in South Texas. He has a broad understanding in regards to geopolitics. Let's listen to what Ambassador Ray will say, and we will join you on the other side of this video.
He spent 3 decades in the U.S. Foreign Service with postings to Sierra Leone, China, Thailand and Vietnam. He also served as the U.S. Ambassador to Zimbabwe and Cambodia. My guest this week is Charles Ray. We sat down here in Washington. He spoke to me about what makes good diplomacy and good foreign relations in difficult times and difficult places. Here's our conversation. Ambassador Charles Ray, thank you so very much for your time, and thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. I want to get straight into it. When the U.S. strategy for Africa was launched just over a year ago, the Biden administration said it wanted to chart a new direction for U.S.-Africa relations. We've seen U.S. support for Africa to have a greater voice and greater representation in more global institutions, for example, the G8. That was something that actually materialized. And of course, there has been support for Africa to have a greater voice at the UN Security Council. That has not materialized. But we also saw relations between the United States and a key Africa partner, South Africa, come under some strain, going through a really rough time in recent months. And much of that has been over Pretoria's relationship with Moscow. When you look at the rhetoric around charting a new direction and what actually happens when Russia becomes part of the conversation, do you see a new direction?
I see the potential for a new direction. I think the key is to be realistic in what we can achieve as opposed to what we would like to achieve. I mean, aspirational in reality, or aspirations in reality, are sometimes separated by a chasm of misunderstanding. But it's really a matter of us educating ourselves more on the realities, on the complexities of Africa, and then moderating our expectations to accompany that. I mean, just the South Africa situation is a good example. South Africa, since 1994, has been essentially ruled by the ANC. The ANC was for a long time considered a terrorist organization by the U.S. government. It has been, from the beginning, a leaning to the left, associated with the South African Communist Party, supported by the Soviet Union. And those are historical facts and realities which I think sometimes we here in the United States forget. And one of the issues on the entire continent, in fact, that we need to really get our minds around is that first of all, and I know with the discussions lately about the age of our leaders, this might sound a little off kilter, but the fact is that the leadership in Africa is old. I mean, I don't know, the average age of the heads of state in Africa is what, 65 or so? On a continent where the vast majority of the people are under 25. Now, the thing that we have to keep in mind is that those leaders of that age are the independents, the liberation generation, who are very much products of their history. And their history is, it was the Soviets, it was the Chinese who helped them gain their independence, while we, for what what were to us at the time practical reasons, supported the European colonial masters. And I'm sorry, but if we expect people who lived through that to just suddenly completely forget it, we need to look at our own history and how many people in this country are still fighting the Civil War, who definitely weren't born or living during that period. So we need to have a better understanding of the historical context of the people we're dealing with. You have some people in the ANC who I think are practical and see the economic benefits of close ties to the U.S. and the West. You have others who would just much prefer we send the money and we stay home, and who will never be pro-U.S. And as we've seen here in the U.S., a small vocal minority can drive the train.
As the ambassador has clearly illustrated based on his own perspective with regards to the continent of Africa, a continent this large has enormous challenges that needs to face, and that's the reason why Africa is making shifting positions so rapidly. Africa is the world's second largest and second most populous continent after Asia, at about 30.3 million square kilometers, 11.7 million square miles, including adjacent stands. It covers 20% of Earth's land area and also 6% of its total surface area. With 1.4 billion people as of 2021 data, it accounts for about 18% of the world's human population. Africa's population is the youngest amongst all the continent. The median age in 2012 was 19.7 years old, when the world's median age average was 30.4. Despite a wide range of natural resources, African countries still face a lot of challenges in dealing with their immediate issues that they do have. Now, with African nations moving a lot closer to make some strategic decisions, and its partners are categorizing the continent as if it's a single country, the countries of Africa are making individual choices. The fact that they are within the same continent, they do have different aspirations, different ambitions, and also they really want to achieve the incredible growth that they are seeing in other parts of the world. With the countries like the United States of America that's focusing on its own interests and crafting policies that will fit just the US narrative and its partners, this will result to a lot of clash and also Western interests in the region. African countries are open to work with whoever comes with the win-win aspect, from Russia, China, and also including the United States, and more importantly with the European Union as well. However, with also emerging powers like Saudi Arabia and India, all of these countries are vying to work with Africa. So the African countries are speaking loud and clear what they need for their own future. Let's listen to what Ambassador Havre have to say with regards to democratic principles that are being pushed to the continent of Africa, and how the African people perceive the American strategy in terms of not just democracy but kind of lecturing the African people. African countries are pushing back clearly, as we all have seen in the Sahel region. Let's go back to Ambassador Ray and we will close this video on the other side.
You said earlier that, the United States does not have a perfect democratic system. And we have seen in recent years America's own democracy shaken. For a long time, it has been seen as one of America's biggest exports. But does America today still have the credibility to retain that, especially in a world where democracy is under threat? We see populism on the rise. What kind of example does the United States set?
Well, I mean, right now we probably aren't setting the best example in a general sense. In another sense, this can be, I think, a teaching moment. One of the issues that I faced as a diplomat is that when you receive your instructions to deal with foreign governments, sometimes the people who write the instructions don't take into account the domestic environment that they themselves are living in. if, for example, you're going into a government to talk to them about upcoming elections and the fact that they have to run a perfect election, right after we had a less than perfect election in 2000, that could present a problem. But it also presents an opportunity. When I had to go into foreign ministries or government officials, or even talking to public audiences about their country and the state of democracy in their country and their problems, human rights and treatment of minorities, I would always introduce it by saying, in the United States, we sometimes have the very same problems you have, but we have institutions to which people can turn to get redress. It doesn't always work right away. Sometimes it doesn't work at all, but the mechanism, the structure is there, and that's what you need to look at in your country. Elections are just one component of it. You also have to have institutions that support and undergird democracy. You have to have a citizenry that understands their democratic rights and responsibilities and are active in exercising it, and you have to work at it.
In the geopolitical sense, a number of Western policies that are designed to engage the continent of Africa do not align to what the African people's aspirations are or their various governments. There are challenges faced by ambassadors and also diplomatic circle experts. Most recently, French diplomats were very annoyed to the policies and also why the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, was engaged in designing policies in several areas with regard to speaking about Sahel and also with the France-African Summit, which were very popular at the time. And in Montpellier, the French president basically decided to also engage the communities in the continent of Africa, ignoring the African leaders. That did not go well with regards to the African society. However, according to Ambassador Ray, those policies that are designed back home are not designed in the context of taking into consideration the geopolitical environment and the nations that they are going to engage in. That is the reason why there is a disconnect with regards to how they perceive Africa from the outside and how Africa also operates within the inside. The cultural perspective is taken out of context. Let's close this video with regards to what Ambassador Ray will also analyze based on his own experience in the African continent and in geopolitical circles.
Ambassador, you were the US ambassador to Cambodia and Zimbabwe. Can you briefly give us some insight into some of the challenges that ambassadors face, especially when they have to advocate for US policies that might not be popular or align with the policies of the host government or the country where they are posted?
Well, I mean, as an ambassador, you have to support the policy decided by the duly elected leaders of your government. And so, whether you agree with them or not. And I have no problem with that. I mean, it's because, one of the things that I always tell young people when I talk to them is stand on your principles and stand for what's right. But remember, you could be wrong. When I was in Zimbabwe, President Mugabe's sister died. And I was invited along with the rest of the diplomatic corps to the funeral. We were seated in a tent a mile away from the main stage, not that far, but probably an eighth of a mile. And so we could just see the little figures at the podium, and we could hear because of the speakers. And he was delivering his sister's eulogy. And as he was wont to do when he was in front of a crowd of very ardent Mugabe supporters, he would get into his shtick of neo-colonialism and fighting off the evil Brits and their naive American allies. And he switched from the Shona that he had been speaking into English, and he just got into a really virulent anti-European, anti-American thing. And at one point, and he said, we were trying to recolonize the country, but as long as he lived, it would never happen. To hell with Europe, to hell with America, to hell, hell, hell. And I almost got up and walked out at that point, but my German colleague restrained me and said, let him finish talking first. And we did. And when he sat down, we stood up and left. The foreign ministry, I mean, he didn't see this. Someone from the foreign ministry did and reported it to the foreign minister. And of course, the German ambassador and I got called in and you know, harangued. I walked out on the foreign minister, but that's another story. But the point was, when I was I gave an interview to the media, to the state media, and I explained that I felt insulted by what he said, and when he finished saying it and sat down, I left because I felt I wasn't welcome. And if you insult my country, I'm sorry, I'm going to react. That's just, you know, that's what I get paid for. That aired on state TV, aired my statement without any edits at all. And there was about 3 or 4 days of just really vicious editorials and articles in the Herald, the state-run paper. And then after about a week, it just stopped. It just, you know, nothing else was said about it. And then about 5 or 6 days after that, I asked for a meeting with Mugabe to talk about it. We had a 45-minute, extremely cordial meeting, half of which we spent talking about the merits of regular and extra crispy Kentucky Fried Chicken. Okay? And the foreign minister who was sitting there, who was still upset with me, was sitting there slack-jawed. One of the young guys in his office, who I knew well and got along with, later told me that when Mugabe himself found out about this whole mess, he would never apologize directly to me, but he recognized that under African customs, he was the offender, because you do not offend guests in African culture. And I was a guest. And it wasn't his intent to offend me. He was talking to his supporters. I mean, the fact is that when you deal with people on a human level, you can get things done. If you pigeonhole them, if you stereotype them, and then you react to them as if they're that stereotype, they're going to live up to the stereotype.
We want to thank you for watching. Hopefully we've informed you with the double standard regards to the United States of America's policy in the continent of Africa. Let us know what you think with the U.S. presidency in the region. Of course, the United States have made some huge contribution in the continent of Africa, helped African countries from health issues, some developmental projects that are important. However, the U.S. need to consider and understand that Africa as a continent has a number of countries in there that have different geopolitical interests, and these countries will continue to make those interests their own priority as a result of their own people. If Africa is making wrong decisions, we're gonna find out. Thank you for watching. If you are new to this channel, watch some of our informative video on this YouTube channel. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.